sales and RevOps leaders find themselves drowning in a sea of multi-vendor tech stacks. The result? Less time selling, more time managing tools. Synch is flipping that script. Synch's platform leverages AI to minimize the operational burdens of running your revenue organization. Their AI admin completely changes the way that you build and maintain your Salesforce instance, so your team never has to build a flow, a dashboard, or an Apex trigger ever again. No consultants or additional headcount required. And Synch doesn't stop there. They've unified all your go-to-market reporting with a shared analytics suite. Forecasting, deal review, pipeline management, alerts, lead assignment, all at your fingertips with zero implementation time. The best part? All of Synch's reports and insights talk to each other, sharing data to optimize your sales process automatically. Synch isn't just a tool, it's your revenue co-pilot. Learn more and schedule a personalized demo today at withsynch.com. That's WITH with Synch, SYNCH.com. Hey everyone, welcome to Operations, the show where we look under the hood of companies in hypergrowth. My name is Sean Lane. If you've had any conversations about AI or the big market players in the AI space over the course of the past year, chances are you've at least heard the name Nvidia. In simplest terms, Nvidia makes really powerful chips that help computers perform really complex tasks, especially those involving graphics and artificial intelligence. What's something like that worth? Well, their current market cap is $3.2 trillion, and they just wrapped up fiscal year 25 with $130.5 billion in revenue. Crazy. And look, I was a communications major, so I'm not going to sit here and try to break down the amazing technological advances behind NVIDIA's chips. But I do appreciate a stellar RevOps team when I see one. And NVIDIA has had a bona fide RevOps star on its team for the past 6 years in Kelly Goles. Kelly is the manager of revenue marketing operations at NVIDIA. And I'm not exaggerating when I say star. Kelly literally won Lean Data's 2024 Ops Star of the Year award at their annual conference. So she was someone that I really wanted to talk to. Kelly and her team have been tasked with figuring out how to use AI to accelerate commercial performance. And that's exactly what they've done. Through her team's work, NVIDIA's go-to-market team has saved 1,500 hours per week of sales users' time, and they've 4x'd the amount of leads that reps can work. In our conversation, Kelly and I talk about how her team thinks about the reality of AI agents. We talk about how she focuses on scaling with operations versus scaling with headcount, and where the responsibility of AI experimentation and enablement ultimately falls at NVIDIA. To start though, with such a spotlight on the company, I wondered if Kelly felt pressure to be on the cutting edge of how they use AI internally.
I would say it's not a pressure. I would say we're all excited about it. And I would say we're all excited about it, and we're super lucky because we have every resource in the world to kind of be able to execute and actually do what we're thinking about. So I would say like we've been looking, and because we're an AI company, we talk about certain concepts, we talk about ways to use data. And since the RevOps, the area that we're in, it's a data heavy, workflows and teams, and we're oriented around that. We see the possibilities of it. So I wouldn't say it's as much as like a pressure, but it's that. I think in terms of us being like a well-oiled machine as we work towards some of these things, I think we have the same challenges and we've gone through the same things that every company has, probably that's trying to implement some form of AI or work with other third-party vendors on implementing what they've created for AI. So I think it's probably the same challenges. I think for us too, it's an interesting thing because we've reinvented some of our go-to-markets and we have different ways of selling. Like, so for example, like we've been primarily a hardware company. Now we're starting to sell more software. So as we transition with some of those things, we probably have similar growing pains to companies that are also maybe selling software in the recent amount of time we have been too.
I love that. I love the way you flip that. And it's the opportunity that's in front of you all as opposed to the pressure. So let's talk about some of those opportunities, right? To your point, you and everyone else for the last year or so has been trying to figure out not only what's possible, but then kind of what's the right mix of what's possible for you and for your go-to-market. And so can you take me through kind of how you have been kind of exploring and experimenting with some potential use cases that are actually going to be a good fit for your go-to-market at Nvidia?
Yeah, I think that we approached it similarly to a lot of peers. And I think it's been happening, within the last year or two, people have been talking about how RevOps is kind of primed for like a AI transformation. I think it used to be called like digital transformation, and that was like the big word, and now it's AI transformation. So it's like every MarTech tool is now like a platform. They all have some sort of AI offering. So I think one of the ways that we approached it was, okay, we're already partnering with like a lot of these vendors who are coming out with some sort of AI feature. Let's like try to work with them and test it or partner and see like what they're thinking, what it's capable of. I think the other thing that we did, we started looking for point solutions. So we started being like looking for ways that we could do smaller scope projects. So for example, one thing for us, we were like, oh, well, we have like a lot of junk leads that come through from like our web forms or, various things like that. Maybe like this would be a way that we could automate and test and run like a project on that, which we did. So we started looking at like different point projects and solutions and almost forming like these POCs for some of these like smaller scale projects. And I've heard people do similar things too, like crawl, walk, run approach. And so I think we did the same thing. Like, let's look at our existing vendors that were coming out with things, and then let's look for more like point solutions.
It's kind of interesting that like, if you look at the last few years, we kind of went from this very point solution heavy world where all of a sudden people started to get, I think, a little bit more platform focused in like 2021 to 2023. And now all of a sudden, to your point, like, because there's so much now that's possible, point solutions, it feels like might end up becoming something that people are paying more attention to, because you can go and attack this very specific problem with a new tool that wasn't possible or available before. And all of a sudden, like, you have another opportunity. Is that the way you guys are thinking about it? Because like the tech stack evaluation at that point must be pretty intense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how we started with it. I think most people, like, they're approaching it to your point. Like when we had like the automation, digital transformation thing happening, people started solving for point solutions. Now we have this new AI thing. So people, it's either point solution or better way of framing it's probably smaller project in scope to try to like figure out like how can we start using it? Because if you start thinking about, well, how to re-architect everything and automate with AI and plan end to end, that's a way bigger project than like, hey, let's start small with like a couple things and figure out like what's working for us, what's not. So we started down that same path, I would say, as everyone did. And then we kind of moved into like this building phase, and it's like a more like, how do we group some of those like smaller projects or point solutions, what they were offering, and group it into something that's more like elevated to our platform that we were building out. So yeah, we've been consolidating in terms of like traditional like MarTech stack too, right? Like how do we move away from point, and how do we like approach things with like one platform? And I think the AI projects was the same. We started with these smaller ones, and then now it's like, well, how do we actually make change on the platform that we've been building out with our MarTech stack?
Regardless of whether you're a firm believer in platform first or you always want the best in breed point solution, Kelly's point is that she's focused on finding ways to solve specific problems or points of friction faced by her team at Nvidia. I asked her if she could take us inside the company and walk us through a specific example. Here's Kelly.
So I think like same thing with when we think about the crawl, walk, run, I think we all had the vision of the run part at the end, which is like, and I think a lot of people are talking about now, like this idea of like an AI agent. And Salesforce launched their version at Dreamforce in a big way. And at Nvidia, we look at AI agents as something similar too. Like we have other products that are coming out around this AI agent that will help and be more like this assistant-based thing. So we kind of work backwards from there, because I think one of the things with the AI agent is they're in a sense automating the operating model that you've already built out, and they're working off of the data that you have. So we started looking at, okay, if we want something to automate, something to work on this part at the end, do we have even like the right data for them? That was like one key thing that we started with. A lot of people I think are starting with too, which is like, how do we have like the right data and any gaps around like things that we would train on or things that we would automate off of. So like one big one for us, like this year, as even an example, we brought on people.ai. that was like a big shift for us and kind of a game changer. We realized that we have a lot of sellers that talk to a lot of different contacts at their accounts. They're engaging in a lot of multi-threaded activities with meetings and emails and phone calls. And all of that data wasn't necessarily getting written back into CRM or like a usable data source. So like PeopleAI has been a great partner for us in like transforming and basically automating all of that data capture and putting it into a format for us at Salesforce so that then we can actually use for a lot of like these Gen AI or predictive projects then that we have going. So we started shoring up things like that and kind of working backwards from the end state, and then like how do we build out the operating model? How do we have like the right data to do all that? And I think even like as ops professionals, as we've been moving it over to, you know, to your point, like a platform or automations over the last couple of years, all of that is still going to be so key as people start to look at like an AI agent or anything like that, because the agent is still executing under the operating model that you've built.
Right.
So if you don't have a good operating model, you don't know what you want the agent to actually do, it's not going to be like a successful outcome then I don't think for what you're looking for.
And that's even more true about the data building blocks that you just described, right? If you've got all of these insights that you want to drive based off of, you know, which contact roles are associated with opportunities, but no rep in the history of reps wants to associate those contact roles with their opportunities, then like good luck, right? But you've now found a gap in terms of your use of PeopleAI to both identify who they're talking to, but then also more importantly, to bring those back into the system to use for whatever future insight or workflow that you want to create. How do you kind of work cross-functionally with your different partners internally to make sure that, like, if you are tackling a new problem, whether you're using AI or not, honestly, that you have all the right kind of data there to be that foundational layer for whatever it is you end up going to build later?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of like the first principle stuff around like, you know, at the end of the day, we're still servicing sales. Mm-hmm. We're still servicing like real people. We're still trying to solve and accelerate their workflows. Like, I don't think AI is going to replace, for example, like our sales team in a large way or anything like that. So I think when we cross-functionally work with teams, we're more like around solving for something that they're already working on to try to help accelerate sales. So for example, like customer success, if they're already trying to look at like a churn model, for example, they have a good idea, like that customer success team or that customer success ops team, of like what would cause someone to churn for like the products that they're selling, mm-hmm. what wouldn't. And so then we would partner with them and say, okay, well then if you need to have this kind of outcome, so then our customer success team can go out and sell, like let's work backwards then and see like based on what you're saying and those variables, like how can we build that data in? So I still think we keep it very people oriented and workflow oriented, and work with those people in that way and then work backwards on like what we need.
I appreciate that Kelly and her team are so laser focused on their internal customers, the end users for what they're building. They're building to solve specific problems for those users, regardless of whether AI is powering that new potential workflow or solution. And she stresses that we can't just jump ahead to the end run state. We have to crawl and walk first, which sometimes might mean some pretty painful foundational data work. And none of that is new. This has been the type of work that operators before AI were already doing. So what are Kelly and her team doing differently now that the tools available to them are changing?
So my whole like RevOps team, we've basically been trying to help orchestrate and automate everything for these different sellers and these different workflows in our day jobs now. So for example, we have lean data and they do the routing. We have a sales engagement tool, like Sales Loft Outreach, Salesforce Sales Engagement, different things like that. We have lead scoring where we're basically trying to say like, hey, these are the right people. We're going to orchestrate and route to those customer success, people, or the account manager, or for us, there's like a team of 4. So it's like XYZ number of people reaching out to an end customer. Yep. And we're planning out that logic and saying like, you know, me, Kelly, I'm going in, building my routing rules and saying, based on this industry and this attribute about this person, we're going to route it to this person. And then we're orchestrating the follow-up and saying, and then they should trigger into this sales engagement sequence with this type of content and this type of follow-up. And we're kind of manually doing all of that. But that's where I think the AI agent can come in and actually say, learn and react and build out things better than we can. Because we're basically manually doing it. I see the AI agent coming in and automating all that in a way. And that's why I'm big on saying that even all the work that ops teams are doing right now in terms of building out that operating system, that's so key, because that's what AI can come in and I think can help accelerate it and work through. But if you don't have a good idea of like some of those manual things that you're putting in right now, what outcomes that you do want at the end, I don't think it's going to be a successful deployment then either.
I mean, it sounds like just as much of this work, while it's focused on kind of those end users, those end customers that you have internally, right? The salespeople, it sounds like just as much of the benefit and potentially the change in the type of work is going to come to the people on your team, right? The people who will actually be the ones both kind of designing how these tools are implemented, but then hopefully there's less kind of like maintenance and tweaking, right? Because in the example you just described, one, like the person who's designing all of those routing and like automation decisions needs to have a pretty in-depth understanding of how the business works in order to do those things right. And then also they need to be able to go back, 30, 60, 90 days later, and then make all of the manual tweaks to the routing, to the automation, to the enrollment, whatever, based off of things you're learning within the business. But now I think based on the kind of newer world you're describing, some of that like maintenance and later tweaking from ops people might be removed. Am I thinking about that the right way?
I think so. And I also think it will be better at getting the right people to sellers with the right follow-up.
For sure.
For us, it's like a lot of A/B testing, and it's kind of like send it out, and then we'll see after you do it, or we'll kind of do that. And we learn as reps. But if you look at a company like Nvidia, for example, like we sell to every industry. We have thousands of product SKUs that we sell. The messaging can be so different. So to have like even a team to go in and kind of manage and looking to do all the things we're trying to do, if we were to go down the manual route, not like that AI agent route, it would be so many hours and a team of people probably working on it. So it's a scaling way, I think, for us also.
Yeah. I mean, I know you and I have chatted about that a little bit, and just like kind of your charter of how you can scale through some of these tools as opposed to just by adding more people. Like, how do you think about that mindset internally, right? Because going from the version that you just described with the manual creation to the brand new version that's like kind of like this optimistic future, that doesn't happen overnight. And everyone talks about like the really cool use cases that are possible, but then to actually pull it off across such a breadth of product lines and customers and industries, like that's really hard. So like, how are you going to do that? How are you doing it right now?
Yeah, I think it comes down to like what we talked about too, like the platform versus like a point solution. I think we're in this point of consolidation because like, let's just say you do want to have an AI agent that's orchestrating across everything. Either A, they're going to have to orchestrate across all of your existing MarTech stack. So they're going to have to work with like a Salesloft and Lean Data and all these other ones and kind of plug in. Or you move towards, you have one sort of platform, which I think which is what Salesforce is selling to, right? Of like, you do everything in Salesforce and then the agent sits on top of it and it's an execution platform versus Salesforce just being like a data layer and everything else that's third party sits on top of it. So I think for us right now, we're still making on that operating model and we're still trying to figure out like how's the best way to have like that AI agent piece and component come in and work with the sellers or work with us as ops. So I think we're still trying to figure that out too. So the best thing that we can do right now and what I suggest to people is figuring out like what that actually looks like and evaluating like what your go-to-market is, what your teams look like, what are they using, how are they interfacing, and then figuring out from there like what the best way to move forward is. Because like some tools I've seen with AI agent, it's like there are whole other platforms. Now you've incorporated like another tool and another interface, or do you want to try to double down and use your existing interfaces like a Salesforce because that's the best for you or not? So I think it's kind of like an exercise you have to evaluate for yourself.
If you go back and listen to episode 134 of our show with Brett Queener from Bonfire Ventures, you'll hear him echoing a lot of Kelly's same questions about where and how we will all inevitably interact with these different AI interfaces. Will it be one platform like Salesforce with agents plugging into an already existing data set? Or will we have a number of different interfaces that are separate but pulling from all the different tools in our tech stack? I think that very much remains to be seen. Now, Kelly, because she works at Nvidia and because she's put so much thought into this work, is someone that people turn to for advice on this topic. And through working through it herself, she's codified a 3-step process for how to transform your go-to-market strategy using AI. Her 3 buckets are 1, triggering, so how prospects enter your funnel in the first place and demonstrate intent. 2, orchestration, routing the right prospects to the right people. And 3, engagement, how your team will ultimately try to contact those people. I asked Kelly to take us through those steps and how she makes them come to life at Nvidia.
I'm big on those 3 buckets because I think it's like how we've set up even automations in general. And I think like that's also, if you had like an AI agent come in, they'd be operating in those 3 buckets. And the triggering, what I mean by that is like finding the right accounts and the right people at the right point in time. So I know we're super lucky. Like we have a in-house data science team. Thank you, Santa Paul, and everyone, if they're listening. They've actually gone in and done some things too cool around like building out like a custom intent model. So they actually look for things of our own internal first-party triggers, so like engagement like on our website or engagement with our activities that we can track internally to NVIDIA, like developer downloads of things or different triggers, like touch points like that. They also leverage third-party data, so things like 6sense or things like Intensify or other vendors, and they aggregate it. And they basically have been helping us say like, okay, this is the right people that look like they're in market to reach out to. And so once we have like those people identified, then we can actually queue off different engagements and interactions that way. So the orchestration component, that's where it's like, now we've identified this person's ready for something. We kind of know what they might be interested in. We know what they could want to talk about next. And now let's actually write them to the right team member. Maybe it's customer success. Maybe it's an account manager. Maybe it's someone who's on our like developer relations team. So that's like the orchestration piece of like, now who do we route it to? And then the final piece is the engagement component, which is like, well, what are they actually supposed to talk to them about? And what does that talk track look like? And what's like the right assets and collateral that they can use to help with what that person's interested in? So I think like the triggering the right people at the right time, orchestration, routing it to your right person at NVIDIA for us, that should be following up. Then what should they actually be following up with? That's kind of like the loop that we try to do. I think it's hard because I think people get really into dashboarding too, and like looking at reports. And it's like, you give the seller like, hey, check this report daily and see like which of your accounts are surging, or like, you know, these are the ones that are showing really high intent, and then try to go do something with it. So I think like with this operating model, what we're trying to do is like take out any of like the manual guesswork and sort of queue up actual execution with that model versus just insights.
And when you say queue up actual execution, what do you mean by that?
I think I mean making it easier for sellers not just to say like, look at a dashboard and say, hey, this is super nice. These are all the accounts that are surging. Let me think about that as I continue to do what I was planning to do for the day. Maybe I'll like do something with it. But what I mean by queuing up actual execution, it's kind of going back to like that sales engagement component too, which is like, here's the insight. We built it into the process that we already have. And for most people, it'll probably be like lead scoring or whatever routing they're doing, and then whatever sales engagement tool. We're actually building it into that. So then if I'm a seller, I'm not looking at a dashboard. I'm looking at my task list of things I have to do when I log in. And it's kind of already queued up for me of, oh, I need to send this email to this person because they're showing intent, and this is the talk track. So it's kind of queuing things up for them to take action on, or even in some cases doing it for them, versus sort of this insights and then forcing them to kind of think about it and go find the assets, go find the talk tracks, and then take action off of it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, like choosing that moment what is the right time to kind of bring that rep into the fold, both to either approve, you know, something that's already kind of prepped and ready to go for them to go out the door, or for them to kind of craft it on their own. Like that question is tough, right? Because I would think about it like up until pretty recently, I would say if you had some sort of like target account type strategy, you could say to your team, look, like this is the threshold from a fit perspective And then this is the threshold from a behavior or intent perspective. And then when it clears both of those thresholds, I'm going to give it to you to kind of take action, right? That's the best use of your time, knowing that this is a company that's a good fit and they've shown some level of intent, right? And so your job, Mr. or Mrs. Rep, is to start from a point of personalization to the people that I'm telling you clear these thresholds. And so now, like, that line, I feel like is just going to keep getting pushed further and further down the funnel, where you can then say, okay, we've cleared behavior, we've cleared fit, and I've already personalized it based on everything we know about this person. And like, you could either just ship that out the door to the person, or you could give it to the rep for them to approve. But like, these are the types of kind of, I think, like, design questions that ops people are going to need to be making, leveraging some of the new things that are available.
Yeah, and it's like, it goes back to that thing that we talked about too, like scaling with headcount or scaling with operations.
Yeah.
Even like an engagement tool, or like when we're queuing up like that, if you had one person and you took out like half of their prep work to reach out to someone, you could double their efficiency or do something like that. But it is a question. I think also it depends on like your model. If you're a smaller startup and you're trying to like build out some of this, and maybe your kind of customer base or your leads coming in, the volume isn't too high. But when you look at something like, for us, our thing is about scale, because we have so many leads. We have a lot of different accounts that we're targeting. It's pretty large scale of what we're doing. So this for us is almost like a coverage model too. Because otherwise we won't be able to spend maybe as much like personal one-on-one. Maybe a lot of people are showing high intent, but we can't kind of reach out to everyone. So this is like a way to automate that too.
And because I know your focus is very much kind of top of funnel lead management type work, like, what is the measurement for you that tells you whether or not some of these experiments are working? What are you looking at to see whether or not you're creating the leverage or productivity or conversion rate change that you think you're making?
Yeah, I would also say that it's top of funnel, but it's also the big shift for my team too right now is we're thinking of leads as also our existing contacting customer base. So it's the upsell, it's the cross sell, everything that we're building out right now. It's more of like a sales outbound motion, and that's not limited to just inbound, like net new names, like coming through the lead nurture. Especially if you think about for Nvidia, for example, like you've bought the hardware and then now we have software products coming up. That's like a big opportunity, I think, at least for our team to help accelerate like some of those newer types of outbound motions that we have. So I wouldn't look at it just as the inbound like lead motion. I think it's how do we nurture the entire contact base of existing people, even though we already have.
I think that's super.
Start layering. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
And then you start layering in too, because it's not just sales too. Like again, it's customer success, it's developer, it's like all these other people, and for us also it's channel partners. So it's co-marketing and co-selling, because that's like how we go to market. So it's like layering in all those people too. So sometimes it's not just like a direct sales motion, it's like some other sort of like nurture happening also.
Did you catch that? Did you write that down? Kelly's title is Revenue Marketing Operations. And when I implied that meant mostly top of funnel work, she jumped right in and expanded the definition of her team. Sure, they're helping SDRs prospect better, but she realizes that everything her team is building is also perfectly applicable to post-sale, cross-sell, and expansion motions. So many marketing ops teams, or marketing teams for that matter, don't do this. This org design pairs really well with a company like Nvidia because they have so many different product offerings. But executing work like this across pre-sale, post-sale isn't easy. There are a lot of cross-functional stakeholders that you need to bring along. So I wanted to know how Kelly and her team pull that off.
I think that's where the operating model that we built out is like shining. Is, for example, like if everyone's working out of the same sales engagement tool, and you're triggering where most of those people, like what path they're going into in terms of engagement, you're kind of pre-planning that all out together. So then we can partner, like we talk to customer success ops, like when would we send someone to your team for this follow-up versus sending them to an account manager? And so when you build people into the tools and you have like complete CRM base too, like with people.ai now for us, like mapping in when they're talking to customers, what they're talking to them about. it makes it pretty easy for us to trigger then off of all those interactions and like plan out where they should go. So that's kind of the benefit of us all being and working out of this third party tech stack too. And everything writing back to CRM, which I'm going to keep harping on like the data, but having like a complete CRM, it's really kind of the only way to execute what we're doing too.
Yeah. I think that's so important because it's so often the case that some of those engagement decisions are made by the individual teams, right? And so you end up with one engagement tool for kind of leads and new biz acquisition, another one that is run by kind of product for product communications, another that is run by the customer team because they've got a different platform where they're measuring things like health. And so therefore they want to send their email messages from that, right? And then you've got a marketing automation tool kind of floating around on top of all of that, right? And so what you're saying is you've kind of managed to consolidate everybody to say, this is the engagement, the point of the place from which engagement is sent out to in any part of the customer journey.
Yeah, we're working on it. And at the very least, you can see what everyone else is sending. That's been the key part for us too, like with the people.ai integration. It's like you can go in CRM and see like Kelly and Sean emailed today. Yep. And if I'm the account manager, can see that and be like, hey, Kelly, since you're the internal Nvidia on my team, can we talk about what you talked about? And then we'll kind of coordinate before we talk to Sean again. So the other thing too, it's all about the customer experience. It's pretty annoying too. Like it's actually what started us down this people.ai path in the first place. Is like our SDR and BDR team were reaching out to new leads that came through. And they would reach out and they'd talk to them and they'd be like, actually, we've been talking to someone on Nvidia for like 2 years. And it was just that account manager didn't put their contacts in, they were talking to them, that kind of thing. Because we didn't have that incentivized in our system that way. So it becomes like a better customer experience too when we can pre-plan everything out versus a kind of free-for-all.
So what's up next for you guys, right? We've talked about all these different use cases you've explored. You're clearly been building this operating system internally. Where are you hoping to kind of go from here in the next 6-12 months? And what are the things you're going to continue to experiment with the team?
Yeah, I think we have this operating model that we've been building out. We're working on, we're A/B testing. I think as we partner with, again, very lucky in-house data scientist team, some of the things like we start to look at the kind of bucketing project into 2 categories. I would say it's around like predictive and then the other buckets around like Gen AI. So it's like, how do we do a lot of the forecasting or how do we do a lot of the predictions, like we talked about, of like routing the right people to the route at the right time into the right cadences. Like that's the kind of thing that we're going to be building out, almost somewhat like a AI agent, but basically our own prediction models mapping and building out that logic for us. So that's kind of one of the bigger things, I think. And then on the Gen AI component, it's also around things like how do we write some of the sales emails? How do we maybe incorporate a version of like a AI SDR and like an assistant kind of where it's like writing the emails for them and then sending it on their behalf or reaching out to someone maybe like our leads that are maybe showing lower intent and some of our leads that are showing higher intent just to get a touch point on them. So I think like those are like the 2 buckets I think about as we go forward.
And on the Gen AI piece in particular, right? I feel like there's kind of 2 ends of the spectrum there, right? There's like a super controlled version where you have like this like centralized group of people within the organization whose job it is to figure out how the whole company should use Gen AI. And then the other end of the spectrum, it's like everyone's kind of testing their own thing and figuring out Gen AI use cases that might be relevant for them and their role or their team. Like, how are you finding the right balance between that to both kind of cultivate the sense of like experimentation within the company without having it end up in a world where, to your point, like everyone's versions are siloed or interactions are different and you can't really create that cohesive customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do, right? Like, I think probably like our BDR team has probably been using ChatGPT since it came out to write all of their emails for the most part, or like rewrites or things like that. Mm-hmm. But there are certain things in like the ways that we approach projects and work with teams. Like at Nvidia, you can imagine there's actually so many data science teams, so we have kind of like a governing board of almost like projects or different like ethics that we screen through. We mark like a lot of different projects, so that's been helpful. to like look through that. And then when it comes to Gen AI like piece and like trying to incorporate it, I think for us the winner is going to be how can we incorporate it into the workflow where like reps actually can write emails in a meaningful way. So I think it's going to be like looking at like that sales engagement component piece, for example. The two tools that we use right now are SalesLoft and Salesforce Sales Engagement. We're running both in parallel for different reasons. But whichever one that we can plug into where reps are actually writing, so they don't have to go to an additional screen or additional things, and it can kind of be built in that way. And it actually can pull in data sources that are relevant. I think that's going to be the key. And incorporating enough data to aggregate to actually build it out too. So for example, I've seen different companies that pitch to us and they will write emails maybe just based off of like one data source. Versus like what you probably want is you probably want it to be super multi-threaded. You probably want it to incorporate things, for example, like our entire sales email base of like what emails are getting sent by your whole sales team. But you also probably want it to incorporate things like our Nvidia.com web pages, or for us, like HighSpot, where you're keeping the sales engagement or enablement content. So different things like that incorporate it. Because if you base it off of just one, it's probably not going to be as accurate. Like if I base it off of what every sales rep is writing, that's probably good for the conversational tone, but they might be saying, wrong things about something or misquoting something. And so it can be referenced in a different way too.
And are you, this is a tough burden, I guess, but like, are you sitting in RevOps like the arbiter of all of that, right? Like that's a lot. Everything you just described is a lot, right? To figure out how it's working, what's the best version of it for the team? Like, does that fall on your plate? Is that a shared responsibility? How does that work?
It's definitely shared because there's so many teams trying to work on the same project. But what we're responsible at the end of the day is for that sales enablement piece. And because we own all the tools that people actually execute out of, it needs to integrate with what they're doing there. So I think that's the piece that we look at. Like at the end of the day, we're still looking at like, how do we enable sales reps to sell better? So we are definitely a part of the evaluation process and care about it being successful, because if it's not good, they won't use it. Or worse, they use it and it's not good for our end customers. So I think like the burden of that kind of falls on us, especially if we're doing like email plays, for example. We're coordinating all those and we're sending out bad emails. We're definitely then like a key stakeholder. And we try to help where we can too. So even like bringing on something like people.ai, where it's an additional data source now of like all of the sales emails, because we knew we needed to have that component built in. And then we work with the data science teams on like, well, where else is the gaps and what else do we want to bring in and what makes sense? And we bring sellers in too. We work with a lot of like sales leaders, and they help us give their input too, since they have that knowledge of like what's actually helping them. So we incorporate a lot of different opinions on it too.
Before we go, at the end of each show, we're going to ask each guest the same lightning round of questions. Ready? Here we go. Best book you've read in the last 6 months?
I really like Shoe Dog, about the Nike co-founder. That was a pretty good one for me.
That's like one of my favorite business books of all time.
Yeah,
so
that
good.
was a recommendation from my brother, so that was a pretty good one.
It's awesome. Favorite part about working in ops?
I think it's like a big puzzle, and when you finally figure it out and things kind of work and it flows all together, that end satisfaction and knowing that you actually help people too, at the end, it's a pretty good feeling.
The best. Flip side, least favorite part about working in ops?
I think sometimes it can be hard to do transformative work and ask people to go outside their standard workflows or operating processes. So trying to sell that vision and get people on board, and taking all those opinions, it can be a labor of love sometimes. So I think that's probably the hardest part.
That's a great answer. Someone who impacted you getting to the job you have today?
Yeah, I'm going to say actually my dad on this one. It's funny, when I started my internships too, like he taught me this too, of like when you're working on a project, he's like, try to think through, he's an engineer too, so it's helpful to think about, but he's like, try to think through like what the problem is through the whole solution, before you come up with an answer at the end. Try not to just kind of ask questions or start from the beginning. Like try to think through it end to end. And I feel like I still have that in the back of my head, and I still operate that way with a lot of the projects that we work on too. It's kind of almost like an engineering mindset to it.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. Shout out to your dad, and I'm sure very helpful still to this day. All right, last one. Now your turn to give some advice. One piece of advice for people who want to have your job someday.
I think it's good to be data literate. There's two parts, I think, to like this job. There's like the data and then the analytics component that you have to understand and enjoy. But then at the end of the day, you're kind of an internal salesperson too. So you need to be able to communicate clearly your ideas, the outcomes that you're trying to do, and be able to kind of persuade people to go on that path, kind of lead without authority might be a better way of saying it, or working cross-functionally. So I think having that technical component, but then also that good interpersonal skills and communication is key to the success that I've seen here for our team too.
Thanks so much to Kelly for joining us on this week's episode of Operations, and congrats again on being the 2024 Ops Star of the Year. If you liked what you heard from Kelly and learned something from our show, make sure you're subscribed so you get a new episode in your feed every other Friday. Also, if you like the show, leave us a review. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, 6-star reviews only. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.